One of the more traditional tunes on an album that New Order put out after discovering the joys of Ibiza and acid house and all that stuff. That's Run from the album Technique, which I think was 1989. Steve Merchant, The Steve Show, 6 Music. What time is it? 3:05. We've already played a great tune. I'm excited. And now, for those of you that didn't listen last week, there is a very simple policy on this programme. It's kind of a meeting place, if you like, to swap and to share music. But I don't want you to, if you've only just joined in, I don't want you to think it's an intimidating place. It's not, you know, a sort of trendy, interior designed private club with an imposing bouncer on the door. It's a real spit and sawdust kind of joint. No pretensions, a lot of friendly staff, a lot of spilt beer on the floor, pop in the lavatories, you know, one of the toilets is clogged up with tissue paper, there's a smackhead, you know, just shooting up in the other one, you know, it's really, do you know what I mean? And there's, you just walk to the bar, there's a couple of sad, lonely, 6 Music-esque listeners, you know, just popping up the bar, and let me introduce them to you. Here they are, it's Dan and Harry. They were here last week, they're here again. Let's have a Steve Wright style round of applause. I'm a big fan of a Steve Wright style round of applause. I just think it adds energy to a show which is otherwise a bit flat. Now, I know what a lot of people are thinking. They're thinking if they heard Dan and Harry's music selections last week, they're disappointed. They're thinking, oh God, he's got those guys back. I didn't like their music. I didn't like their personalities, their attitude. Don't worry, they're not going to be here forever. It's just, you know, we're easing into a new show. It's better to just kind of keep some familiar voices on the radio. So, Harry, introduce yourself again.
Yeah, hello, Steve. I'm Harry, as I was last week.
Thanks very much. It's difficult when you say introduce yourself, because what are you expecting to say? Maybe I'd like to hear maybe about your age and perhaps, you know, your passions and loves in life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I'm 32. I work in a bank. You know, I don't do this for fun.
Sure.
You know, you make me.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, obviously I love my music. I'm a big 6 Music listener, and hoping to lay down some treats for the people out there today.
Thanks very much indeed. It was almost, there was a slight DJ swagger to that voice, and it was nice.
Well, I've had a week to polish.
Exactly, very good. And Dan is my flatmate. He's also that way. Nothing wrong with that way. Dan, introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Dan. I was here last week, and it's very difficult to come up with anything new. If you weren't listening then, I do work somewhere else in the BBC, but I'm not quite sure what I do.
No, you're not an official. The main thing is that neither of you work in the music business, and that's the whole point about this show. It's not about music experts coming in telling you what you should like. It's about music fans, such as ourselves, sharing music with you, the listeners, and you returning the favour. Which is why later in the show we will have 2 listeners on. They will be playing a tune, hopefully persuading me to include it on the Steve Show playlist. You too can also get involved with that if you want to go to the webpage. I think it's www.bbc.co.uk/6music. Follow some kind of link, probably my face gurning back at you, and you can make your recommendations. You can make your stuff there, and maybe in the future we'll have you on the show. Let's have some more choices from me before we get to these boys' selections. It's a shame that if the only image you have of Doherty is through his tabloid representation, then you may well have dismissed him as being, you know, just some kind of wild, out of control, you know, indie hopeful. But when you write songs like that, you know, you just think, come on, clean yourself up, man. You could be great. You could be one of the greats. Wolfman with Pete Doherty, and is it Doherty or Doherty? I never quite know. I think it's Doherty, isn't it? Get in touch. Do you know what? No, don't get in touch and correct us on that, because it's just not significant. And the song called 4 Lovers. And I was thinking, because whenever I read these articles about Doherty, I'm always slightly ashamed that I'm not more rock and roll. And I mean that in the broadest sense, you know, and I think we know what we mean when we talk of Doherty's rock and rollness. And I was thinking, this is a good example of how non-rock and roll I am. When I first moved to London, I was invited to what I thought was just a regular nightclub. And I remember it was behind Tottenham Court Road, and it was essentially a speakeasy. Right, and you went in there, and you know there was a little slit in the door, and they opened it up, and the guy sort of looked at us intimidatingly, and we went in there, and it was very debauched. No furniture, nothing on the walls. You know, it was essentially like a sort of squat version of a nightclub. And I remember there was a guy who was very intimidating, the security, and he walked around, prowled around, and he had an 8-ball on the end of a chain. I remember thinking, where'd you get an 8-ball on the end of a chain? You'd pop in somewhere and say, could you just attach this to her? And anyway, and I remember thinking, and there was a lot of naughtiness going on, you know, and I'm not gonna, because it's 6 Music's BBC, but it was pretty rock and roll in there, and it was outrageous. There was, you know, all sorts of nonsense going on. And the whole time I was in there, I was thinking, this place does not comply with health and safety regulations. There was no fire exits, there were clearly no smoke alarms. Had there been a fire, heaven forbid, I don't know how we'd have got out. And I think you know you're not rock and roll in your blood when you're in a speakeasy and all kinds of debauchery is going on, and you're just thinking, I don't know how I'd make an exit if there was any kind of problem. And so that's my problem really. I feel like I'm not naturally rock and roll. Boys, are you rock and roll through and through?
Well, I wouldn't say I was. I'm clearly several rungs up the ladder from you.
Sure.
But rock and roll isn't really in my blood. I don't know about Harry.
What's the most rock and roll thing you've done then?
Oh, me. I once threw a full banana out of a window, and I didn't care where it landed. I just didn't care. This was when I lived in Bristol, and we lived on the second floor, so it had a long way to go.
Sure.
So you know, that was pretty wild.
What did it do? Just land in the front garden?
Yeah.
Rock and roll, man. High five.
High five.
Yeah. Harry, what about you? Are you a rock and roller?
Pretty much so, Steve. Yeah. What I do, I also carry an 8-ball on a chain, but I use mine to rig pool tables. Right. So rather than paying £1 a go, you know, I don't carry that sort of change with me. Yeah. I slip the ball in, pull it back up with the change. All the others are flushed out. I've got a free game of pool.
That's a pound save. Nice work. Round of applause for that. That's the kind of thing that on a public service broadcaster like this we need to.
You're surely worried now that that's not strictly legal, and are going to advise Harry to desist.
Hey, do you know what? There are so many things on this show that are a little bit near the edge. I mean, I've often talked about how friends of the past, one of whom later, the walker Dave, who's walking. Well, we'll come to that later. But anyway, he sometimes sends me compilations. I think you'll find he's breaking any number of copyright infringements. I do not care. Well, I do. Obviously, I do not condone that in any way. Do not ever. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. I should make that clear straight away. Do not ever break copyright infringements, particularly if they're my own DVDs or product. But more importantly, do not download music illegally. Buy it through iTunes or other MP3 software, or buy it in a shop. Do not steal. Do not thieve. That is that. No, it seems now like you think I'm being flippant. I'm not being flippant. You know, how are multi-millionaires like Chris Martin and Noel Gallagher going to buy a 15th property in the Seychelles unless you are buying their music? No, and I genuinely, it sounds now like I'm being flippant. I'm not. I do think it is wrong to steal music, because I think it'll just lead to chaos in the future. But anyway, you remember last week we were trying to find out what the average Six music listener is like. Who are they? How do they think? Get in touch. I want to find out what you, the listener, what's the most rock and roll thing you've done? Now, obviously, steer clear of the naughty, the illegal. I just want to find out what did you do if someone was to say to you, "Are you rock and roll?" What's the one thing that you've done that you would point to? Harry, what's the email address?
The email address, Steve, is stephen.sixmusic@bbc.co.uk.
Is that Stephen with a PH?
It certainly is.
And Dan, what's the text?
64046.
I didn't get that. Give it to me again.
64046.
I still haven't made a mental note. Please, once more.
64046.
Supergrass, St. Petersburg. I play that for anyone who managed to go along to the Pudstock music gig that was on yesterday in London, and I believe that you could only get tickets, I think, if you bought a Christmas pudding, and then found a special coin, Willy Wonka style, inside, and that got you along to the gig. Or you could bid for them on eBay, which is what I did. And I was amazed at how amazed other people were that I'd actually paid for a ticket. They obviously thought that, with my showbiz life, that I could blag any kind of ticket, but no, I thought it was important to give to the charity concerned, which was Crisis, in this case, helping out homeless people. And I've been a little bit disrespectful of homeless people in the past. I remember, because it's very easy to ignore them. And I remember I was at a cash point once with my friend, and it was when the clocks go back, and the homeless guy said to my friend, "Clocks go back tonight," and my friend said, without thinking, "Yep, extra hour in bed." I thought, you don't mention that to a homeless guy. He's had a 4 hours sleep. He's tanked up on the special brew, trying to sleep on Tottenham Court Road. So it was a good gig, and we had Supergrass there. It was a very intimate venue, only about 300 people. It was lovely. Also, Dirty Pretty Things played. So it was great, and obviously you should support Crisis. So go along to Crisis website and, I don't know, donate your car or something. Round of applause for Crisis. Steve Wrightstyle. We've had a number of emails and texts about the most rock and roll thing. We'll come to those shortly, although Adam in Southampton, we obviously can't read that out, but yes, that is rock and roll. Now, part of the reason that I wanted to do this show was really to kind of explore the fact that I source my music from the usual places. I get them from free CDs on the cover of magazines. I get it from listening to the radio. But most importantly, I get it from recommendations from friends. That's why I've got to... And let's be honest, we've said it before, they're nobodies. They're just oiks from the street. But their music taste is sometimes acceptable, and that's why I brought them in, and they are here to kind of introduce tunes. I decided to pit them against one another for no good reason beyond the fact that we've got to fill up some airtime. And so we will be asking you, the listener, to vote on the choices in due course. But who's up first, Jude? Is it Dan? Dan, what's your choice number one this week?
Well, thanks first of all for pitting us against each other.
Yeah.
I've been spat at in the street. People have gone up. Anyone who listened last week would know that I was beaten by Harry 2-1, and it was a humiliating defeat. So I've brought out some real big guns this week.
Really? Well, we'll be the judge of that, but go on.
Well, first tune is by the New Rotary Connection.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with them. They were kind of a sort of, I don't like the word fusion, but they kind of crossed between rock and soul. And
Sounds like fusion to me.
Yeah, a little bit. And late 60s, early 70s, very creative time for music, but there was also a lot of dross around about this time.
Absolutely.
And I'm not going to say that they didn't occasionally go a bit experimental, but I think this is a great tune. I think you'll find my 3 tunes today are all in some way quite uplifting, and I think this is a great Sunday afternoon uplifting tune. It's got a big sound, and hopefully it'll lift the vibe. It's called Vine of Happiness.
So why did you decide to throw a banana out of a window?
Well, I thought I'd sample a bit of the rock and roll lifestyle.
But why a banana? I mean, presumably you looked around your lounge and you
Yeah.
thought, I'm not going to throw the TV out, that's madness.
No, that would be madness. And I think deep down inside, I had a deep care and concern for anybody who might have been walking by.
Was it a banana that had gone off and you probably weren't going to eat it anyway?
No, it was still edible.
Right. So that's at least 12p wasted.
Yeah.
Well, that is rock and roll.
So you're more impressed. I can see your eyes lighting up.
I am indeed. Have we had any rock and roll emails, texts?
We have actually, yeah, Steve. Pedro got
Pedro?
Yeah, he got drunk on JD with Lemmy in the Whiskey A Go Go.
With rock and roll Lemmy?
I think that's it. That might be the whole topic closed, because that must win on any day.
Well, that's if it's the Lemmy. I mean, it may just be a mate of his.
Yeah, if it's just
Lemmy.
a guy called Lemmy.
Yeah. But if it's the Lemmy, that is the winner. Sure.
Perhaps JD with Lemmy is a cocktail. Well, it's just JD with lemonade. I'm not sure. Perhaps if Pedro could clarify, that'd be nice.
Any from you, Dan?
We're sort of asking people to keep them nice and short. But this is a simple one. Someone who's thrown their TV out of the window when they were a student, and they'd had a few cheeky ones. But they were on the ground floor, and the TV didn't even break.
Oh, that's pathetic.
Diminishes the effect.
I'm not a fan of people who just copy the classic rock and roll poses of the past. I mean, throwing a TV out the window, it's just so dull. I mean, if you're going to throw anything, well, make it a banana, obviously, that's what we're saying. But it's like when bands smash up guitars. You just think it's so yawnsome. Because I always look at bands, particularly young bands who are just starting out, and they smash up a guitar, and I think, do you know what? You've not made enough money yet to be able to afford to do this at every gig. Again, that's more mind, you see, that's the way I work. I'm not rock and roll. I'm thinking that's silly. You could have auctioned that for charity.
But also, Steve, the young people watching, they might be inspired to take up a musical instrument. Well, there's one just being destroyed in front of them. That's going to put them off.
Yeah, it's madness. Listen, what was that tune you just played for us, Dan?
So that was the new Rotary Connection and Vine of Happiness. If the vocalist was familiar there, it's Minnie Riperton, who went on to have a global smash with Loving You. But I don't know what the vibe is from Harry.
Well, my thoughts were I could see that getting turned down by the execs at the ad agency for Diet Coke for being too drippy and wet. It was quite enjoyable, but really, it went on.
It sounded like it could have come from the soundtrack for Hair or some kind of musical. Right. Well,
it's not fun. It's big. It's dramatic.
This week, well, I wouldn't say that. This week, it's not up to us. It's up to the listeners. And obviously, the text lines do not open yet until you've heard both tunes. Harry, what's your choice?
I'm going to be playing Glamorizing Cigarettes by Scarce.
That's pretty rock and roll.
Exactly. And, it was from the time back in 95 when it was fashionable to sound as if you'd been smoking a few fags before you started singing. Quite interesting. The band released this single off the album. The lead singer then had a brain aneurysm, was out of action for a long time. They re-released the album in the States with a completely different lineup, but the band kind of dissolved into nothing. But this is a great single.
That's Harry's choice this week on the Steve Show 6 Music, Glamorizing Cigarettes from Scarce. Dan, what were your thoughts?
I believe I remember Scarce, actually, which is unusual because it's the first of Harry's tunes that I've ever heard of. And I thought it was very, very predictable, a sorry choice from a man whose powers are rapidly failing.
But, this man had a brain aneurysm, Dan. You're having a go at him. He's just made a lovely song.
Get out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Shall I go?
Now, as I say, last week I made the decision, but this week it's up to you, the listeners, just to keep you involved, keep you listening. I mean, otherwise you probably shoot off, do something more important, more significant with your time. Perhaps go to the cinema. That's what I do on a Sunday afternoon. But you can get in touch, 64046, make a note of it and have it pinned up by your radio. It makes perfect sense. 64046. We've got Dan's choice, the new Rotary Connection, and Vine of Happiness. What's a Vine of Happiness? Beautiful thing. What is a Vine of Happiness? Well, this is Harry's choice. This is Scarce and Glamorizing Cigarettes. So you can get in touch.
No,
text Dan for the first one, text Harry for the second. 64046. It's 6 Music. It's Steve Merchant, and we'll be back after the news. That's the first song in a new feature that I'm going to call A Song That I Heard on the soundtrack of a TV program or a film that I saw. We've never really come up with punchy titles for our features, I admit that. Of course, coming later, Mr. Cover, or is it Mr. Coverman? I'm beginning to think Mr. Coverman might be better.
Yeah?
You're the guy in charge of the jingle, Harry.
I tell you what, give me 20 minutes, I'll work on it.
Thanks very much indeed. Because there's a great TV show that you may not have seen yet called Entourage, which is following the adventures of a sort of up-and-coming movie star in LA, loosely based on one of the executive producers' lives, Mark Wahlberg. And he's got this gang of his entourage who follow him around, and they're great characters. It's very charming, very sweet. If you've enjoyed films like Swingers and things like that, you'll really love the show. I think it's on ITV2 or ITV4. I think you'll find it perhaps paired up with a TV show called The Office, the American version. I don't know if you've heard of it. And anyway, it's dynamite, and that